Okay, we're going live here today for the fall rally at the Authenticity Fair, and I'm going to introduce Gracy to begin our workshop here. So Betsy is gonna, I guess, help me kick this off here. We just went live, and
hi.
we're a little bit of improv moment. So I'm going to kick the stage over to Gracy, and we'll have fun with the workshop.
Oh, Lance, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if I really do facilitate best, I'm like have some other voices and people. So if I need to pull you and Betsy on, can I pull you guys on just so we can talk about some of this stuff?
Absolutely.
Okay, we'll be here. I'm gonna like magic, like Pins and Betsy, and you guys are gonna pop up, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you're gonna keep us on our toes. Sounds good.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Don't multitask. All right. Thank you. So hi everybody. I'm really happy to be here. There's so many things I want to start with, but let's start just with a few deep breaths. So wherever you are, if this is a good moment for you to relax, you can close your eyes. You can relax your hands and feet. You can feel where you are sitting or standing or lying down. Just let your body get a little heavier, more grounded, more present. Take a deep breath in through your nose and then sigh it all out. And we'll do that 2 more times. And exhale. And last time, inhale all the way. And exhale. And as you sit here, I'll take just another moment to really recognize and bow to your authentic self. The part of you that is not confused about who you are. The part of you that always has wisdom to share. And the part of you that is deeply connected to all the other authentic selves in this world and universe. And as much as we listen to any words through this retreat experience, we can more than anything listen to this authentic self inside of us. So as you're ready, you can just come back into this space. It's so nice to be here. Oh, so for those who don't know me, I am Gracy Obuchowicz. I was a Y.O.U.er from 1997 to 2001. Even though I think we're all always Y.O.U.ers in our hearts, our authentic selves. But I left the group in that when I was in college, and I was in Eastern region. Unity of Fairfax was the main congregation I was part of, and I served as an Eastern region regional officer. Regie, that's what we called ourselves, right? And then an international officer in year 2000 to 2001. I was an president of communications. It's hard. I like feel the feeling so much. And I'm like, what were all the terms we used to use? But it was a powerful experience. My father-in-law is actually here right now. And he asked what workshop I was going to do. And I was telling them all about Y.O.U. He's like, that sounds amazing. I'm like, it was amazing. It was really amazing. And I got to do a workshop a few months ago with the other retreat that you all put together. And I actually just want to take a moment to really thank Betsy and Linz and Rachel and anyone else I'm not remembering to thank here for all the work you're doing and bringing the alumni community together. And what I witness is building like a whole other level of what this energy of Y.O.U. could be for us. But it was so important for me. It really showed me at a time in my life where I needed that modeling, how to live a life based out of your heart. how to remember that our inherent connection to each other is love and not competition, and how to trust the self that I found inside of myself, how to give that self space and how to trust that self. And looking back, I'm like, if I hadn't gotten a Y.O.U, like I was not getting it in school, I was, had some friends that were great in my life, but they were definitely not on a spiritual path. I don't know if I would have gotten it. But I think, so that's the good part of Y.O.U. and what it's given me. And I'd say the hard part of Y.O.U. and what it's given me is that it gave me this really clear, true north of like, this is what energy is about. This is what life is about. This is what we can do. This is what our authentic self can bring. And then it kind of took the container away and was like, go out in the world. And so over the past 15 years of leaving Y.O.U., that I've really started to, I've just tried to follow that path of true north. And it's been kind of a hard journey in some ways of just recognizing like, nope, this is not it. This is not it. But I think the gift of Y.O.U. is that it has given me that place I want to go towards, that remembrance of what we can build in community. And I just say that because I wonder how many of us do feel that way of like, wow, it was so powerful. And it's just really hard to recreate that magic in other ways. So with that, I'm going to talk today about work, because when I think of magic and this like special experience of self, and then I think about what most of us have to do on a daily basis to earn a living in this world, I think there's probably a disconnect, either small to great, between those two. And I'm hoping that in this hour that we are together, that we can talk about that. And I think one of the biggest levels of kind of healing that I find around these concepts is just having a space to be honest. And then we can experiment with a few different ways of frameworks of holding information around this, of how do we see work? How do we see ourselves at work? And we can strategize a little bit about how to bring more authenticity into our work. So I'm trying to toggle a little bit between the chat and the presentation screen. So feel free to put anything in the chat. If you are listening live, Betsy, I see you. Linz, I see you typing too. If anyone else is listening live, just go ahead and, put your name and anything you want to share, especially as it pertains to work, in the chat. And if you have any questions or things you want to mention, I really love reading it. So Betsy and Linz are saying yes to having a true north and then having it taken away. It kind of feels a little like a Zen koan or something, where it's like you've experienced everything that you need to be in this life, and then whoops, it's gone. So like, what do you do with all of that? And I think that the tension between those two, it's a powerful way to start to look at this, maybe. Okay, so first, a little bit like, why would I lead this workshop? I live in the Washington, D.C. area. It's where I grew up, and I went away for school. I did Peace Corps in South America, and I came back. And like so many of my Peace Corps friends that were coming back, I was like, I'm just going to apply for jobs. So I applied for nonprofit jobs in the Washington, D.C. area. There are a lot of those around here. I got one fairly easily, and I was doing grants writing for like a really large nonprofit. And I was there for like a day, and I was like, this is weird. I was like, I don't understand what's happening in this. Like, well, how are people relating to each other? It's like they're kind of talking to each other, but then they're always looking away from each other. And the boss was really like mean to everybody, and people were afraid of him. And no one was like, people would have all these conversations behind people's backs. And I was like, this doesn't feel good at all. And around this time, I had interviewed at another nonprofit. And they called me and said, our first person didn't work out. Would you like to work there? And I said, yes, I really want out of this dysfunctional environment. So of course I should have probably asked more questions, but I didn't. I dove right in, and I dove out of one dysfunctional office environment into one that was just so dysfunctional. It was literally on the brink of collapse. And I won't go into all the details, but on my last day at work, so I was there for a couple months. I was like, I got to get out of here. The FBI came in and seized all the files in the building because there just had been some real wrongs that had been done there. Luckily, I got out, no problems. So at that point, I was like, I don't know what's going on in those office places, but I don't want to do that anymore. Like, that doesn't feel like me at all. And so I organized my whole life for the next 5 years around not working in an office. And I did whatever I could do to not work in an office. So I studied photography in school. So I did a lot of commercial photography, including photographing pets, a pet photography business in the Washington, D.C. area. Not because I love pet photography, but because I thought it would make some money. And it did. And I started teaching yoga. And that was at the point where I was like, when I taught yoga, I was like, this is warmer. we talk about that true north, and like, I was like, this is warmer. Like being in this room of people who are all showing up for themselves. It's really, this is the direction I want to go in. So I went in and I started leading retreats. I taught yoga classes. I did Thai massage. And then around that time, it was like 7 years ago, I took a training on Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. I find it to be a very powerful form of self-care and healing. And I decided to start doing group coaching courses. So without really meaning to be a coach, I just became a coach, and have spent the past 7 years really trying to understand why self-care is so powerful. And I think it's similar to Y.O.U. and how I feel about working with people on self-care, is that I started to do it thinking it would be one thing. Like, oh, this will be good for us to work on our self-care. And what started to happen was so powerful, so life-changing for people when they focused on their self-care, that I've spent the past 7 years reverse engineering of like, why is this so powerful? What are these characteristics? And in the same way that I think with Y.O.U, we can look back and be like, why was that so powerful? What were the things that had to be there in place for that to feel so powerful, for us to feel safe, for us to feel seen, for us to feel heard? And so how do we begin to recreate that from those components? So I have been an entrepreneur for the past 12 years now, I believe. And in this stage, I'm trying not to go too much into my story. In this stage, I've realized the limitations of entrepreneurship too. That there are, I think people really idealize, like you work, you do your passion, do what you love, and everything else will come. And I could probably lead a whole workshop on why that's a very complicated thought to have. But what I have learned a lot about in the process is my own authenticity. And I've learned a lot from my clients, most of whom live in the Washington, D.C. area, most of whom are, for people who live in the Washington, D.C. area, like very work-centered and doing cool things with their careers and having trouble finding balance with those careers and the rest of their lives, just beginning to hold space for these deep questions that we're asking. I recognize how much our self-care does get inhibited by the workplaces that we're in, and how much potential I feel working within workplaces around self-care and working within individuals around how they practice self-care at work, how much potential we have to actually change the system for the better. And I'm going to move on to some concepts I want to share, but I want to say one thing. That I have a friend, he's a shaman, and I met him in Peru. And he said, one of the first conversations I had with him, he said, in the place that you are born, there's great karma for you. And I was born in Washington, D.C., and I can be a little cynical about D.C. because it is very work focused. It's just not the most like artistic, creative like community in many ways. But as I've kind of lived into my own authenticity and done the work that I've been drawn to and really learned from that, I've recognized how much I need to be in Washington, D.C., and I need to be working on work within a very workaholic culture in order to bring this healing about that I think is possible through self-care in that way. So I want to offer that to you to reflect on the place that you were born, and just to think about whatever karma that place might have for you. I'm gonna check the chat here. Alex, oh, hi, Alex. I want to say I have a predisposition I'm working through, and that the phrase work-life balance is so frequently misused by companies that want their employees to be okay with being more overworked. I love that. Yes, we're definitely going to talk about that. And Gabby says, hi, Gabby. I feel pretty lucky with the fact that I work helping people. I help older people who don't really understand technology to get in video visits with their doctors, and also have a company that really cares for its employees. However, there are definitely experiences, especially with having that customer service self and people pleasing. Ooh, yes, I feel that. Those are the moments I don't always feel my authenticity able to come through. Yes. Thank you, Gabby. And then Jenny's saying, Jenny Stern listening live. Hi, thank you. Agree about finding true north in Y.O.U, but also reconciling growing up and having a new, different true north than the one that was true in high school. Oh, yes. Thank you for saying that. Yes, that I think our true north has evolved. And that's maybe where the more potentiality comes from this Y.O.U here. The alumni is that we can take that like vision that we saw, and we can also take all the like cool stuff we've learned as adults too. Okay, so I want to get into this because Alex brought up this term work-life balance. And working with people, working with myself, I hear people talking about this a lot. And what I understand work-life balance to be, people describe it for themselves, is that like I do work, that's something I go do, and that's work. Like that's my work world. And then I do my life, which is like everything else is in that bucket of things that I don't get paid for. And within that, we say that we should be able to find like a scale, like balance between the two of like, that I work the right amount of time and I live the right amount of time, and I feel really great about how things are balancing out. And I think also within that, we have the idea that like, we're not going to mix the two very much. So I'm not going to maybe bring my work stress home with me. Or if I do that, I start to feel bad about myself. I think it's also the other thing that I'm not going to bring all the creative, fun things that I just love for myself to work. Not because I'm like trying to withhold from people, but because there's not really a place for that. But I'm not supposed to have emotions at work. I'm not supposed to like have deep relationships at work. I'm definitely not supposed to like, rock the boat or like suggest new ideas or just like be myself at work. I have to kind of put on that office self. So the concept that I would like us to swap for that, and you don't have to swap it forever, but just for the sake of this hour, I want to invite you into this inquiry, which is instead of work-life balance, to wonder about work-life integration. And what I mean by work-life integration is that there is not really a self that we can separate off from ourselves that goes and does our work, that can go and not feel any of this like vital, alive, authentic self and be happy in any way. And that's also not like we're not the kind of people that are built that we could experience like lots of different kinds of stress in this one area of life. And then when we walk in the door at night, we shut it and we magically think we're not supposed to think about work anymore. So work-life integration to me, it means that we're one unified being and that we're experiencing how we go and earn money in the world in ways that things that we do that do not earn us money in the world. And I want to just also reference that a lot of people do a lot of work in this world that they do not get paid for it at all. And I still see that as work. And I think that we need to like bring that into the conversation as well, especially caregiving work. But that all of it is working together, and that when we can bring it all together in ourselves and recognize that we're just one being going through these experiences, that actually becomes the way that we learn how to set boundaries, that we really begin to check in with ourselves about how we really feel about things, and that we can start to orient to work from a much more authentic place in ourselves. I'm going to summarize that here. So work-life balance is like this idea that there are two separate buckets. You should keep the buckets separate, and that the buckets should sort of like balance themselves out. And where I see people struggle on that is that they can't. They're always crossing stuff over from the buckets, and the buckets are never quite in balance. And they feel bad about that most of the time. And then this idea of work-life integration, which is like just one person going through all these experiences, trying to check in about how I feel, what's authentic to me. And from that place, being able to, use more of the things that I should be putting into buckets to like make decisions for myself. I'm going to just check in and see if anyone has any pushback or comment on that. Feel free to put them in the chat. Alex is saying, I'm so not okay with bringing myself to work. Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. And even, this is where I thought it would just be an office thing, but after years of having a brand built on me, I've recognized how like hard that is too. And how once something you start to like show up and be like, this is who I am and sign up to work with me, like it gets very confusing. And a lot of the ways I'm trying to recreate my work right now is to like, just, take some of that out of there and like find out what's really authentic and what I actually don't want to share and what I do want to share with people. I posted on LinkedIn. I try to post about the stuff on LinkedIn sometimes, and people started to push back on this idea of work-life integration because they said that it means that if you have work-life integration, you don't know how to set boundaries. That like no, you would never have a boundary about when you would be working and when you would not be working. And if that's how it lands for you, that's totally valid. But just in terms of how I'm sharing this, I think that this is really the path to learning how to set more boundaries with ourselves, is that we need to be able to like mix the buckets together a little bit more. And it's in function of nervous of being able to set more boundaries, check in with ourselves, figure out how we want to share ourselves. So this does not mean you go to work either and just tell everybody everything that's happening to you. Like that might not work for you. It might work for you in some cases, for some relationships, it might not work for you in others. For me, it was like, I felt like I had to tell everybody everything through my newsletter and podcast. And then all of a sudden I was like, I don't know if I want to do that anymore in the same way. So just to say that all of it is about checking in with yourself about what you need for you, your self-care, your well-being, and then recognizing that you can set boundaries around these things. So I'm not going to give anyone a prescribed set of rules. All I'm going to do is share my experience, and also, some frameworks and ways to think about this. Okay, thank you all for listening. Okay, well, let me share one more part, and then I want to bring Linz and Betsy on here too. All right, so I want to share what I see to be the main problem, and then I want to share after that a little bit of what I think could be the solution. But the main problem with why it's hard to be authentic at work, and that is because dysfunctional behavior. So dysfunctional behavior, what I mean by that is there's three things I want to say about dysfunctional behavior. One is that what I think dysfunctional means is that you don't get the result that you want from it. So dysfunctional behavior would be like trying to like hit up someone who's in a relationship, like flirting with someone in a relationship and then really wanting that person to like be your person. I would say that's dysfunctional because that person's not available, and yet some of us have patterns with that we like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to like eat the brownies because I want to feel better, but the brownies don't make us feel better. We still eat the brownies. And so that I would say that's dysfunctional behavior, just in the, like, you're not getting what you want out of the situation. The second thing I want to say about dysfunctional behavior is that it's trauma. And some of this trauma is personal trauma, things that we've experienced in our life, particularly as children, but also inherited trauma, patterns that we've inherited throughout our family lineages. And then also, the third thing I want to say about this is that dysfunctional behavior, this trauma, I think it's symptoms of a much larger cultural disease, which is around oppressive culture, capitalism, white supremacy, that we can hold power over other people to get them to do what we want, especially if it means economic gain. That we can ask people to turn parts of themselves off because they need to earn money doing this. We can take advantage of people in this way. And all of this cultural sickness, which has so much trauma based on racism, sexism, ableism, put all the isms in there, that all of this is just trauma that we're all walking around within our bodies and our minds and our spirits, and then it's expressing as dysfunctional behavior. So there's a really wonderful activist and writer named Resmaa McKenna, and he talks about how individual person, when dysfunctional behavior or trauma, it shows up as like a personality or an ego, or like just, oh, that person that rubbed me the wrong way, that person seemed really, not cool. That's a person. But when it shows up as a culture, as a people, a community, it starts to represent culture. And so I think when we look out and see like this is culture, and we look at the office place and the workplace in many instances, that this can be dysfunctional behavior. And I think that this, like, we have to look at this like a spectrum. The dysfunctional behavior in your office place might be just the systems at play. And I want to just reference back to this thread. Yeah, Gabby, as you were saying, it's like you work at a really great company, but you also have a customer service self, this like idea of what we've been taught of, like, you have to make this person happy. You have to maybe sacrifice some of your own needs to do this, that this is like, we're trying to get people to do something or calm people down, that there might just be parts of that system that feel dysfunctional to you. And it's just hard to know what to do with that because you feel the dysfunctional behavior and how that sacrifices your own authenticity. And that's like, has a bit of an ick factor to it. All the way to the other end of what I was experiencing in that second workplace, which was just like people being openly hostile to each other, people engaging in illegal activity, people having like real mental health issues as a result of working there. Again, I only worked there for like 2.5 months, so it wasn't that big of a deal for me, but I saw the fallout of that. And I talked to clients before who say they work in dysfunctional workplaces with bosses who have dysfunctional behavior, and it really takes a hit on their self-esteem. I'd like to just leave that spectrum open for us to say, like, it doesn't, if you struggle with feeling authenticity in your work or wanting to feel more but not being able to, it's probably because of the spectrum of that there's some kind of dysfunctional environment, that some part of ourselves like does not feel safe, or some part of the system does not feel safe to you. And to engage with that, you have to cut off pieces of your own authenticity. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. I would love to hear some other voices that are not mine. So can I snap my fingers? Linz, Betsy. What do you guys think?
Gosh. That's yeah. Okay, so I definitely had a comment about this specifically because I think all of this, what you're talking about right now, ties almost directly into, or can, to what they're calling the Great Resignation. because some people aren't filling their cup from themselves. And so they're used to filling that cup by squashing someone down. And so I think what happens is that they go into different services in the communities. You know, like you go to a place for food and you're frustrated with your own life. And we've been taught that the customer's always right, which inherently excuses bad behavior. And so now people are like, I don't want to be treated like this. And these jobs typically don't pay well, which also justifies for a lot of people bad behavior. They're low skilled, you know, we're dehumanizing people to put them into ways to make money so that and so now I think that's part of the reason that we see people leaving these jobs, because people inherently don't want to be dehumanized, and the system of the customer's always right when the customer's behaving badly. I think that I was pretty excited because I was like kind of older, but yeah, I mean that's really I think what you're talking about. No one wants to. This inherently will make you feel, you know, you can't be authentic in a place where someone's just treating you badly to treat you badly, because that's a part of your work as a waitress, as a not to make it, you know, a gender specific thing, as someone who works in the service industry. Not that I do, but that's what I see partly with the Great Resignation. What do you think, Linz? Just throw it over.
No, absolutely. My last job, I worked for 6.5 years for the LA County Bar Association, and it is all attorneys and the people who have emotional scars from working with attorneys, and the structures they have set up based on the emotional scars from working with attorneys so that they can go to work and not want to die. And so it was a pretty toxic place, and the pandemic made my boss in particular insufferable, and I ended up taking the plunge into entrepreneurial, you know, and starting a company, and eventually just taking the leap maybe sooner than I should have, because of how like the toxicity, the downward, you know, like the boot on my neck kind of thing feeling of working there.
Thank you both for sharing. Yeah, I just, as you talk, I'm just like, it's everywhere. Like, it's just, I mean, I feel like I've gone as far as I possibly can into entrepreneurship to like be myself, and I'm like, it's here too. Like, it's just, I think it's the whole system, and it's our like engagement with that whole system has to go against our values in some way. And I think that's going to make us feel like we're sacrificing our authenticity.
Yeah. I'm in my new position where I'm now the general manager and I have a team. The best I can do is just acknowledge the forces that I see at work and be like, I understand that I am currently in the position of being your boss and having to ask you to do this thing, and that's unfair and all this stuff. And I want to acknowledge all that before and try to acknowledge it from the top so that it's as psychologically safe as we can get it. And so that at least for this environment, we're trying to create a little bit of a haven where we're holding the forces out. TBD, like I still can't quite afford to pay everybody what they're worth. So working up to it, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. As I do think leaders are such a big part of this. People at the bottom, we see this, people at the bottom are trying to organize for more self-care, and like, will it change things? I don't know. People at the top, that's where things change. And I think what's hard about being at the top is that you have to give up power. And I just think that I don't know if it goes against human nature. I don't know if it goes against how we're conditioned, but I think we have to understand that there's something else to gain. And you, like, being on your path, you're like, oh, authenticity. Oh, like serenity. Oh, like love, peace. Like, you get the true north. So you can navigate through some of that, but the ego doesn't want to give up power.
No, when it's stressful, my instinct is to hold tight and crush. Like there's just sort of,
Yeah.
that's what anxiety brings out. Or, but then I do try. I mean, I think the meditation I learned as a Y.O.U really like prepared me for being able to take really obnoxious things and try not to let them imprint, you know.
Thank you.
But it's hard at work.
It's so hard. It's really hard. And I want to name that for all of us. I want us all to have more grace with ourselves, that like, just that we can't show up and be authentic at work, or we haven't found the job where we can be authentic like that. I think that's a bit of a fantasy. And so just like having grace that like, if either you're just in denial or you're like recognizing it, and that's really hard to recognize it and like figure out how to navigate in it, because the anxiety and the trauma and all of that is very real. And that's gonna, make us feel bad sometimes and do things we don't want to do always sometimes. Betsy, anything else you want to add? Oh, I think you're muted.
I am muted. Yes, there's just so many places where you just said that like being authentic at work is somewhat of a fantasy, and I think that that's true. Even if, because I am wanting to live the dream like the two of you and be an entrepreneur and like really step into that. But it is like part of what I already know is the fantasy is that it'll just be super easy and I'll just be able to be myself all the time. But you're right. Like, how much of yourself do you really share? Because now we live in a social media world where, you know, what you post on LinkedIn matters, you know, like that sort of thing. Like, what level, you know, do you share at? What level, you know, and at what point is it like being authentic versus like oversharing? You know, like, and how you draw that boundary and what's that look like, you know, where instead of looking like someone who's being authentic, you look like someone who is oversharing, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm just going to tell you my thought process, you know, which I guess that speaks to like transparency. But like, how do you see, Gracie, like, where's the line between transparency and authenticity as an entrepreneur? There's a question. Yeah,
it's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question I'm trying to figure out right now. So I'm like, well, I feel fully unemployable right now. Just like, I'm not sure. I've been an entrepreneur for so long. I'm not sure I could work for somebody else. So I'm like, I have to do something. And actually, part of what I've been trying to do with my business is now I'm working with organizations. So working within an organization to help them create a self-care culture within their workplace. And that feels like a good fit for me, because it's like, I can just like meet clients. I don't have to like be on social media in the same way. I just get to show up and do the work. And I'm finding I love that. But it's just like all the pieces I think we're told that we have to do about entrepreneurship. Like, you have to like, perform. It feels like performance to me. And that was like when I started to see myself performing my own authenticity, I was like, this is weird. This is not what I want. And I just have increasingly recognized social media to be like a pretty toxic force in my life. So I know not everybody has who's an entrepreneur can do that. They're not able to walk away as easily. I think pandemic parenting really helped me tank one part of my business. So it was much easier to walk away than some people are when that performing authenticity is still working for you in a way around that. So I think it's just really self-care. It's like, how are you doing? And is this, you know, are you feeling excited, energized, and kind of remembering that you're allowed to feel that way in your work, no matter what you're doing, feel like creatively fulfilled, even if you can't access that in your job right now, you're still allowed to feel that way. That's still like a true north to go for. Is one part of it. And then the other part is that you're allowed to set boundaries, which is what I want to talk about next. So you all can stay if you want. I'm happy to have you here, or you can go back off camera, whatever you like.
We'll go backstage. We'll pop back on next time you snap your fingers.
Okay, great. Thank you. And for those of you who watch John Oliver, there's like a really good bit where he like snaps his fingers and George Clooney pops up. It's really funny. Okay, so all right, so that's the problem. Dysfunctional workplace where no matter where we go in it, we're going to probably find some levels of like our own lack of integrity or authenticity. And then I think the problem within that is that we sort of beat ourselves up about it. Like, it's an individual problem. Like, I should have found the work that I love by now. I should, be better at this. I should know how to be authentic with these people that I don't always feel safe around. So just grace for ourselves in that too. So the solution, I find to this, one is what we're already doing is naming it and recognizing also that it's not us as individuals. It's not our problem that we haven't figured this out, because nobody has really figured this out. It's going to take massive structural change that will probably be multi-generations in the future. Hopefully we get to last that long to get there, but to like dismantle the power structures that make all of this happen. I could lead a whole workshop on like maybe how I envision that happening, but I'm not going to get too much into that. Just to say there are people who are thinking about this stuff, and a lot of people I'm inspired by who imagine new ways of sharing power. But what we can do as individuals who have to show up and make money and do work is, I think, one is to start to differentiate between control and boundaries. I'm going to say that again. We're going to differentiate between control and boundaries. So what I mean by control is that we feel like we should get things under control, right? Like we should figure out how to not feel so upset by that work stuff, or we should figure out a better way to like manage our stress, like kind of control the stress so we don't feel it as much. Sometimes it's like we should be able to like be nice enough to our boss that they're not going to be a jerk to us later, or be nice enough to that customer so they won't be a jerk to us later. And that's like, this is where our trauma kind of bumps up against other people's trauma sometimes. I know people pleasing was mentioned. Just for me growing up in a family with a lot of addiction and dysfunctional behavior, people pleasing and hyper responsibility, those things really like snapped in for me as survival mechanisms. And it's stuff I work with all the time. But just like when I meet somebody who has dysfunctional behavior, a lot of times the response I have to them is to just snap. My trauma gets triggered, and then I snap into trying to think I can control them by people pleasing. It's like it's hard with that when we're just trying to do a good job and make other people happy, because it doesn't seem like this kind of manipulative control, but I think it's very subtle. And I think being able to peel back the layers of what I refer to as codependency is very important for our own personal healing. And there are a lot of great support groups and people writing and talking about this. So I recommend that's an important part of it. But I think what we do to navigate when we feel unsafe, when something doesn't feel right, is we try to control it. And often, as Linz was saying, with power structures, if someone has more power than you and they want to try to control you, like, unfortunate thing is they can probably do that to some extent. You know, it just, if you need to get money from this person and they want you to do this and you don't really want to do it, like that's a form of control. And that's probably going to trigger your trauma. And it's probably going to trigger a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of just complicated emotions, general feelings of burnout, of cynicism, pessimism, low self-esteem, all the things that can start to come up when we are in those really unhealthy, dysfunctional patterns. So control, I find it doesn't work. It's like a very diminishing resource in ourselves. And the more that I feel like I try to think I can control somebody, the more just like, I would say literally like insane it makes me. Like it makes me just feel like I've lost my ground in some way and I lose touch with reality in some way. And so what I have found is a really great thing to substitute for control are boundaries. And I just want to pause there because I just like want to let that word land, boundaries. And I'm hoping that it makes you feel a little bit scared and a little bit excited at the same time. Because I talk to a lot of people about boundaries, and I always said like it's a room full of people. I'm like, who feels like they're good at setting boundaries? Like very few people raise their hand. If someone raised their hand once we start to work on it, they're like, oh, I've been controlling things, not setting boundaries. Like just to say that this is hard. It's very vulnerable work to set boundaries. People talk, there's sort of this thing in empowerment coaches where it's like the boundary boot camp, like you're going to like kick that boundary's ass. And like, I do not find that to be how I engage with boundaries. I'm just like snot running out of my nose, like tears running down my face. And like, I need a boundary and it feels really awful to set this, but I have to do this. I have to tell you how I really feel. I have to say no. And so boundaries often do not feel very good when we set them. It definitely, for me, brings up a lot of fear, especially in relationships, of feeling like if I set this boundary, this person will be really angry with me. They won't like me anymore. It brings up, I think, just very young trauma in myself around like, I have to make everybody happy and I'm not allowed to say no to things. I have to make that customer happy. Yeah, I have to make that really unhappy person happy. This is like insanity where it comes into it. And so I think the boundaries can come in a few different directions. One is this boundary of just detaching with love. If like you are in relationship with your boss, your boyfriend, somebody else in your life, you're in relationship with someone who has a lot of dysfunctional behavior, and you're trying to control it a lot and you're kind of making yourself insane about it, I'd say that just to have some boundaries with that, to be like, I actually can't change this. I can't control this. This system is so much bigger than me. This person has trauma that I don't even understand. And so the boundary is just being like detachment, to be like, it actually has no reflection on me, that like this person has dysfunctional behavior right now. Some people like to say detach with love. If you can manage that, I don't think you have to detach with love for your boss. Like if your boss is being a jerk to you, and I think you can detach just at that psychic layer. That's the first step, just to be like, no, dysfunctional behavior, it's not me. My work here is to disengage at a place of just like, I don't have to feel bad about myself. And then I think that where it gets a little trickier, I think we can always do that. Like, it's very hard work. I think it needs a lot of support. Like, I had to go to some 12-step recovery to get some of that wisdom, and I still work with it all the time. But then I think after that layer of just psychically kind of like holding a little bit more space for yourself and boundaries with other people, is just figuring out like, what are the boundaries you want to set in your work and in your life? And it's edgy. And I think we're seeing it, as Betsy said, in the Great Resignation. People are setting some really big boundaries right now. Like, nope, not going to go back into an office that I hate. Nope, not going to sacrifice like the work-life, I almost said it, work-life balance, or like, the better work-life feeling, let's call it that I have right now. I'm setting these boundaries. And so I think, it's a really powerful thing to say like, no. And I know that there's a lot of privilege in saying that around walking away from a job, but I've actually never felt more confident saying that, because I'm like, there are a lot of jobs out there for people who are looking for work right now. People are really trying to hire people. So if like what you're doing right now is not working for you, like it might be worth looking around and seeing what else is out there. And then also I think there's a lot of gray area around, like I've psychically kind of held some boundaries for the dysfunctional behavior that I'm witnessing, and I'm not ready to quit and set that kind of boundary. So what do I do in the in-between space? And I think that can require a lot of creativity. It requires a lot of listening to yourself. It requires a lot of emotional intelligence, meaning that like you have to listen and recognize anger and resentment in yourself. And I think the anger and resentment, and particularly those emotions, that they correspond to boundaries. I try to think of a good example of this. I'm married and I have young kids, and we're both, my husband and I, we just take on a lot because we have to with our work and everything. And it's just very clear for me when I'm taking on too much, because I immediately start getting resentful of my husband. And it's me having to slow it down to be like, I can make him a horrible person right now in my mind. And sometimes I do that. Or I can say like, it's like, I'm actually doing too much right now. Like I've taken on too much. I'm feeling resentful about this. Like, let's instead have a conversation around like, I feel like I'm doing too much. Like, what can we take off of my plate? Like, what could you do, or what could I just stop doing altogether? And usually it's a balance of those, of like, I need to stop hyper responsibility overperforming. And also like, I need to ask you to help me with this. And so I think that's like listening for that in your relationships at work and the workload that you're given. If you feel like, on Fridays, you're always getting resentful, like, what is that? Like, get curious about that. Like, what is that? Is that because I actually like don't have a lot of energy on Fridays? And that's when like my boss is just finally handing stuff off to me on a Friday. Like, that doesn't work for me. Like, I'm going to feel angry and resentful. So like, what would it be like to suggest to my boss to be like, you know what? I really need something by Wednesday. Like, I don't have energy on Friday to work on that anymore. But Wednesday, I could give you 2 really good days of like working on a project in a continuous way. And then on Friday, we could debrief together and present like a whole new thing. This is what I want. This is what would actually work better for me. And I want to be clear in this, that like not everybody's going to be able to hear you, because again, how power structures work is that if you're on the bottom, you just keep your mouth shut and do your work. But I think to be able to start to suggest some different things, or even the first step is just recognizing for yourself, like maybe this person would never be open to changing the way that they give me my workload, but like, what is it? Like, what would I ask that person if I could? And I'm going to guarantee you that understanding that is going to help you make some decisions. And that could be like, maybe if you can't change anything in the system, you don't want to leave your job, but you're always resentful on Fridays because of your workload. Like maybe it is like on Wednesday, you just go easier. Wednesday, Thursday, you go easier because that workload's going on Friday. Like you got to save up your energy, and you start to organize it a little bit differently in yourself. And this is where self-care has to come into it, is that like, I think one level of self-care is listening to yourself, feeling your feelings, checking in, like, what does this mean? Instead of just trying to push it away, just be like, what is this? This has intelligent information for me. And then the self-care is actually like, what could work better? Like, could I make some changes here? Like, am I willing to like make some changes as well? So I haven't checked in on the chat in a while, so I'm gonna do that. Hey everybody. Lynn says boundaries is an alternative to control. That's a cool way of thinking of it. Thank you. I think so. Alex says trying to control a person or situation is a very short-term solution. It can work sometimes, but only for a short time, like a few minutes. It's not really good for more than getting you through a moment of panic until you can do something that works better. I 100% agree with you, Alex. And it's funny because what I talk to people a lot about self-care too is not trying to rely on willpower to make changes. And I think control and willpower are very similar. They're just very easily exhaustible resources in ourselves that don't really get to the root of change. And so much of what it is trying to control a person is trying to just like get it on the surface. And what changes is you have to go under the surface, feel the feelings, really sit with it, try some different things out, be willing to take a risk. Ryan, hi Ryan, having healthy boundaries will be so that you're not drained of your energy in the workplace or friendships and relationships. Exactly. Yeah, I think that totally is that the boundaries are not just there so we can say we're good at setting boundaries. They're there so we have something really good to give when we are engaging with other people. Ali says, just ate lunch. Oh, hope it was good. Lynn, sometimes just acknowledging that you don't have any real power can take a load off. Absolutely. And we all do that. I mean, I do it so much. I think I'm powerful in ways that I'm not. Like, I have no system. I can't change this. And yet I can change certain things. Rachel says, do you have any guides or top tips for setting boundaries? Any resource you can refer us to? Oh, yeah. I feel like I have written about this before. I'm not just saying that I'm the only one, but there are a lot of people. I'm just like, why I hesitate just because I feel like I haven't actually found that many people that boundaries, the way they talk about boundaries actually really resonates for me. Brene Brown, I feel like I always refer back to Brene Brown, but she's really good. She talks about the relationship between boundaries and compassion and how the people that she interviews are the people who say they have the most compassion also set the most boundaries. I think that goes to the idea that we're like not, that we're going to be mean and people won't like us. But actually, and I found this to be so true for myself, when I am setting boundaries, it's I'm such a nicer person. I really am. Otherwise I just like leak my emotions off on everybody. So yeah, I think if you search Brene Brown, boundaries and compassion, I think there's like some cool videos and stuff. I would search and check her stuff out. Allie's saying, I feel like I have a much stronger boundaries and less tolerance for mistreatment than I did when I became an adult. Like some volunteer relationships that I stayed in to see it out, I could have left earlier with my current standards. Absolutely, Allie. Yeah, I said basically I was too forgiving and overextended my compassion. Yeah, and I mean, often this is where I think some of the stuff in Y.O.U can get a little confusing because I think we're just sort of taught like you give and love and generous and all of that, but I do think that like beautiful, loving spirit that we all have like does need really strong boundaries to hold it and make sure that it doesn't get burned out, doesn't get taken advantage of. Betsy, I love the SpongeBob there. Boundaries, yes. I'm just looking at our time here. I'm going to go to one more little part. Oh, actually, I want to say one more thing about boundaries. I love boundaries. I love talking about boundaries. Boundaries are also how we grow. We talk about wanting to grow. We talk about wanting to change. And sometimes I think that can get a little bit abstract. But boundaries are really, from what I have found, the things that have helped me to grow the most. And it's hard work. It's hard growth because I have to, again, check in with myself, trust myself, stumble through my setting a boundary with myself or with someone else, just feel the vulnerability in that with kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You just tolerate it. It's not like a good feeling. And then on the other side, I'm like, oh, I actually feel better. And I'm like, oh, I grew. That was actually a lot of growth work. Alex says, can you type the name of the person you referenced with boundaries? Yeah, Brene Brown. If you have not read her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, I highly recommend it. She has a great TED Talk on vulnerability and imperfection. Jenny says, can you talk a little bit more about not using setting boundaries as a form of control? actually, this kind of segues pretty great into this next section I have, which is about, what we can change and what we can't change. Because I think that I think it becomes control when we actually don't have any power to change it and we're still trying to. So I think, and when we're setting boundaries, I think it really has to do with something that we have some power to change, or at least we're gonna, feeling like we could. So let me to kind of talk this next part through, which is the last thing I have written down this year. And then if it isn't clear, we can talk through a little bit more. So I wanted to reference the Serenity Prayer here. I don't know if anyone uses this in their own spiritual practice, but it's a good one. It's very simple. I love it. I use it a lot. So the Serenity Prayer is, God, please grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think for my thing, if you need a prayer, like one prayer to remember in your life, it's a good one, because I really use it a lot in my brain to like go through a situation right now. I'll use an example of this is, so my mom just moved back to the Washington, D.C. area. And she's lived in North Carolina for a long time. And my brother and I both have kids. We both live in the Washington, D.C. area. And she moved, he lives like an hour and a half outside of the city. And I live like right in the city. And she moved right next to him. And so now she's been here like a month and a half. And I'm like, oh, they're hanging out all the time. Like she's babysitting their kids all the time. They're having like weekly dinners at the house. And just with DC traffic and everything, it's really like a thing we plan for. It's not something we can just pop in. And I've been having a really hard time with it, just to be like, oh, the way this whole thing is set up, like she's going to have a much closer relationship with him and his kids. Like she's going to babysit. I was just feeling a lot of like my trauma getting kicked up. And so when I use the Serenity Prayer for that, I'm like, what can grant me the serenity to accept things I cannot change? I'm like, I can't change what she did. And that like she moved, living in Washington, D.C., expensive by home city. It was a better choice for her in many ways. Like I get that. I can't change that they're going to hang out with each other. Like and there's an instinct in me. I wanted to call her up and kind of be like, you need to set some more, you need to not do that. And like that was the childhood self to be like, this isn't fair. Stop hanging out with them, or come hang out with me more. I was like, I can't actually control their behavior right now. I can't change that. And then this is the hard part for me, but I'm like, I can't even control the reaction I'm having around it. Like, this is like deep stuff for me around like not feeling fairness in my family and feeling, disconnection and kind of dysfunctional stuff coming up in there. And I'm like, I can't change my own reactions around this either. Like, I'm just going to hear about it. I'm going to get triggered and I am going to get upset about it. So that was like all the things I cannot change. And yet my instinct is so strong to want to control all of that. Be like, I'm going to like get in there. I'm going to make her feel bad. I'm going to like try to get more visits, and I'm going to try to get myself to not feel those feelings. And then I start to go through like, what can I change? And I'm going to like just intersperse the word boundaries with this. So the courage to change the things I can would be, just to really think about what the boundaries are around it. And we went to try to visit her. Like we did a visit 2 weeks in, and we went and had dinner at her house. And I don't want to go into the whole story of what had happened, but basically like the time that we were there, it was not really focused on us and the kids. It was focused on this whole other thing. And I'm like, that's my boundary. Like when I talk to her, my boundary is like, we will come visit you sometimes, and it's a long trip and it's a lot with kids. And when we come, we really need the attention to be on us. You get to see my brother and his kids a lot, and the attention really needs to be on us when we're there, and how to make that a fun, like worthwhile trip for us all to feel like we've connected. So to me, that's like actually a boundary I can set. And like, could my moms hear that and be like, no, we will keep the focus on your brother no matter what? Like possibly, but my guess is that my mom could hear that. And that like, that's a tangible thing that we could change that would make me feel, a little bit more open to this idea and this arrangement that like, I don't get to see my mom all the time, but when we come out there, or when she comes to us, we're really going to focus on her relationship with my kids. And suddenly like my whole nervous system relaxes and I feel more power in the situation. And then boundaries, like what I also can change is that I can talk about it. Like after that, I like went and got myself some support. I like talked to some people. I was like, I was super triggered about this. This is what happened. And I talked to people who really understood it. And they were like, yeah, that's super hard. That's a hard situation. And I got the support that I needed. And so that was something of the courage to change the things I can, was to not feel like I had to be alone in those feelings, but I got myself some support. And I could go on and on, but I hope that helps to just see, like, I think that the control comes from the triggered emotion, the trauma, and then we try to fight it and try to control other people, and that doesn't usually work. But the boundaries, I don't think we're really trying to do them to control other people. When they feel authentic to me, the boundaries are about authenticity, to be like, what do I really want in this situation? I just want to make sure that my kids and my mom are connecting. Okay, well, what can we do? So is that controlling my mom? Maybe, but I don't think in a way that feels manipulative to me. I think more in a way that just feels like, you know, everyone's probably getting more of what they want out of the situation. To me, it feels more healing to ask her for that in sort of an adult way rather than the opposite. Great, I'm just checking up on here. Macy is saying, Brene Brown has been an incredible part of my transition from Y.O.U into adult life. I listened to her podcast, Dare to Lead, and Unlocking Us almost daily. Yeah, she has just been a voice to so many. Her work is so important, I think. Rachel, love the Serenity Prayer and using it as a meditative practice. And then Allie was talking about deleting Facebook statuses. Yeah, and I agree. So that's where I wanted to leave you, is just that, you know, just to think about that for yourself. Like, think about, how do you just kind of see yourself more as one integrated being, and how you live your life, work, and everything else. And how do you just give yourself a little more grace for the ways that you can't always show up authentically at work, because the whole system is kind of set up for that not to happen. And then also, like, how do you think about here, like, how do you stop, you know, kind of look at your tendency to want to control and some of this dysfunctional behavior around work, around whatever it is you're dealing in your life, and instead think about the boundary of, like, how do I just kind of be more of that authentic self, have the faith in that authentic self, that there's wisdom that I could share, be it the boundary with myself or others, and then to look at what you can transform in that way. And I know we're right at the time here. And I wish that last example I had given you had been about work, but it wasn't. Just because I really wanted to access something that was emotionally present for me. And so I hope that you can think about how to apply that, be it in work or any part of your life. And just the very last phrase here is that somebody said this morning in this support group I'm a part of, that, like, part of what we have to do is just be rigorously honest with ourselves. And I wrote it down because I was like, that's what this is. And that's what the Serenity Prayer is. That's what just identifying dysfunctional behavior in ourselves and others is. It's just a lot of honesty, and just the rigor that takes sometimes to really have to be honest and deal with some of the challenging feelings. And I think having support is very helpful for that. So I know that we all probably have different good friends or therapists or people in our lives. And I know that Betsy and Linz and others are just working really hard to make this a place where we can have that. But I think the more of us that have that thread of authenticity, that have the courage to want to be setting boundaries and making changes for their self-care, I think the more individuals that begin to heal from trauma, then actually we get to start to create that culture that is different. And I just also want to be realistic that, like, that's probably going to take generations, that, like, we have to do this work, recognizing that a lot of other people are not ready to do this work yet, probably, but that our work that we do for ourselves, people will notice, and it will help to be part of this healing. So thanks for listening to me. I'm gonna, Linz and Betsy, I know we're right at time, but is there any, like, final things you want to add?
That was really great. I mean, I think that, I don't know, I resonated with a lot of it. And yeah, I don't have any salient points to take it with. Betsy, what do you got?
I mean, I've definitely heard the people with the strongest boundaries are the most compassionate. And I think I really believe that part of that is because, if not entirely because, when you're taking care of yourself, you know what you really have to give. Otherwise, you're not consciously giving. You're just giving, it's just seeping out of you. So I think that getting clear on those boundaries, being honest and authentic, like, it brings it right home. Yeah, as per usual, I also feel like I don't know what it takes to pledge allegiance to Brene Brown, but I think we're all doing it. I mean, yeah, she's so everything. So yeah, I'm just happy that you brought her into this, and that you are who you are, as always, learning so many wonderful things, and grateful you're here. Thank you, Gracie.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you, Linz. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for those of you who are live and shared. I really appreciate reading your comments and your experiences. And if you listen to the recording, hi, we feel you in the way that we are all connected here. So yeah, and reach out to me on my website, Self-Care with Gracy, and Gracy spelled Gracy. I'm on like a long hiatus from my podcast and my newsletter. I'm not sure I'll totally go back, but I am on LinkedIn. Somehow LinkedIn doesn't feel as like toxic as some of the other platforms. So you can connect with me there, or just, connect with each other. But I'm down to have this conversation. And I'll say the one last thing I'll say is that, like, I think all of this kind of leads up to us starting to see ourselves as leaders and starting to like really practice leadership. And that paradigm feels really important for beginning to take that authenticity and put it into practice to change the system. So if there's ever an opportunity for part 2, just to talk more about leadership, I think that would be really cool too.
Well, definitely. I just reached out on LinkedIn while we were talking here, that we weren't connected there yet. But we're actually building a little bit of a group for this network there as well. So because I do think LinkedIn, it's not perfect, but it is a place where people are there to improve their condition. And so they're likely open to change and open to something in that way. They're there to improve their job or their station in life. And anyway, so I'm going to invite you to the Alumni Network group. And I think
this is so fun.
We can kind of add a little bit of this energy into our professional lives on that side, and maybe find each other there and elevate those conversations too. So
thank you. That sounds great.
Awesome.
Okay. Thank you all so much.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.